listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you the podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they are not alone, that everybody starts somewhere, and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. It's not just you. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Cynthia James. She's a transformational coach, an international speaker, and a best-selling author. Like that's not enough to be doing in life. I'm so excited. So welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, Kathy. Nice to be with you.
So listeners, as you know, I always like to start with the icebreaker questions. So Cynthia, we'd like to take you back to where you grew up, what area of the country, how many siblings, where you were in the birth order, and kind of how you think that shaped you.
Well, I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have one brother. I'm the elder and he loves to tell me that. And my mom was a single mom, and you know, it was a challenging time for us because my biological father was an alcoholic. My stepfather was a wife beater and a pedophile. So we went through a lot of changes at a very young age. And
Wow.
I learned to be independent. I learned to really be a survivor because it was kind of keep your head down or you get into trouble. And also to be a great supporter because my mother, when she finally was alone, was working nights, to take care of us. And we were also, on welfare. And so it was challenging. And I became like the assistant to mom, and I helped take care of the house and take care of my brother. And so I think that even though it was challenging for me, it really taught me a real sense of independence and how to take care of myself and ultimately become a supporter of others.
Yeah, take care of yourself and others, but it sounds like that maybe started at a very young age. Sounds like you grew up fast.
Yeah, I was, when my mother became single, I was 6.
You were 6, wow. So did you get to do anything fun, or were you involved in sports or music or dance or theater?
School was I'm going to call it my savior. I was really smart in school. So I sang in the chorus. I was in the debate club. I was in the French club. I was a cheerleader. I did a secretary of my class. I did all of that stuff because it actually helped me have a sense of freedom, because at home it felt constrained and there were things that had to be done.
So this is where you could explore you and really kind of find those things that you loved and kind of show off maybe. And
Yeah, absolutely.
wow.
And I sang. And so, singing was something that people admired me for. And so that was great because we didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't buy great clothes. And a lot of the girls in my school had great bags and all kinds of other stuff. And I didn't fit into that, but people liked me because I was talented.
Oh, very cool. So are you introvert, extrovert?
Definitely. Well, I'm definitely an extrovert, but I have these tendencies to need space to recharge. But if people were to ask you or to tell you about me, they would say I'm an extrovert.
That you're an extrovert. Because sometimes people in theater are introverts. They can perform and be that extroverted self on stage, but then, behind the scenes, they're very introverted. So, okay, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here on the fun meter. Where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being the couch potato and 5, the life of the party.
I'm probably a 3.
A 3? What? I was thinking you were going to say
definitely not a couch potato, and I wouldn't call myself the life of the party.
Okay, yeah, it's good to know you're a 3. And then same scale, 1 to 5 on risk taking. Where do you put yourself? 1 being low, 5 being high.
5.
5. Okay. And would you say that's been in your career and your personal life?
My entire life.
Your entire life, a 5, right at the top. Wow. Well, I love those
I
two.
don't know why. I don't know why, based on where I came from and some of the stuff I went through. But I think there's an adventurer in me and a deep place of curiosity. So I always wanted to take a leap. Even though sometimes I was scared, I'd still leap.
Oh, interesting. So glad you explained that part. That's really going to add value. And I love those two questions because they really play out as we get through the rest of your story. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to be a transformational coach and an international speaker and a best-selling author. Now, what you're doing today, and then we'll get into how did I get here?
Well, I'm a transformational coach. I've had a lot of training. I went through a master's program in spiritual psychology. I've taken a lot of coaching classes and certifications, and I work with leaders. I do a lot of work with women because I feel like this is a time of emerging women. And so, but we don't always know how to get there. So I really guide them to get to that place where they want to grow or where they want to expand. And so I love coaching, and I love being with people, and I love seeing the light bulbs go off. And that's why I love to speak as well, because I get to deliver a message or something that is passion for me, and then see how other people kind of align with it. So that is exciting for me. And the writing, it's very interesting because I never considered myself a writer, but I was doing these workshops on freedom and moving out of trauma, and people kept asking me for a workbook or a book or something. And so I just kept writing things for the people in the classes, and ultimately it ended up being a book. And I can tell you that today I train coaches from that book, but at the time there was so much self-doubt. I'm like, who's going to want to listen to what I have to say? What if I fail and nobody even buys a book? I mean, there was a lot of self-talk, but I felt like if I could just help one person or a few people come through what I had come through, then the book had achieved its goal.
Yeah. Wow. It's funny. I sit here and listen to all that you've done, and I can't even imagine that you would have self-doubt, and yet you have self-doubt. I mean, so I really appreciate you sharing that, because I kind of live in that same space of, well, who am I to put a message out there? Who am I to that people would want to know my story, but what I'm finding is that, everybody's story is so interesting, and how you got to where you are. So thank you for sharing that. And boy, I got to tell you, you just light up when you talk about where you've been and what you love to do. So I love hearing that. So let's talk about how did I get here? So we'll go back to junior high school again. What did you want to be when you grew up? Did you know that coaching and writing and speaking was in your future?
No, I wanted to be an actress and a singer. And I ultimately became that. And then, there was a transition out of that. But that's what I wanted to be on stage. And I think it's why I'm so comfortable as a singer, because I did theater and I did television and I did films, and that's what I wanted to express. I think actually what it was.
Oh,
And so coaching and writing and all that stuff wasn't even in my consciousness, my awareness. What I tell people is I'd love to tell you there was some grand plan that I just executed, but no, it was circuitous. I mean, I was all over the place doing this, and then one door would open and that would close and I'd go through another door. And so, I started pursuing out of high school, singing and being in groups and with bands and things, because it enlivened me. It was incredible to be up on a stage and to be singing, because I think music opens the heart, and to just really see people sing with me or dance or whatever. And it was where I could be totally free, because there were no constraints on how you be a performer.
oh yeah, and sometimes even the more elaborate or more wild is the more more admired. So okay, so you were into music. So did you end up going to college then? Uh, and
I did go to college. I went to college in Minnesota, and I went to college in New York. And then I got, believe it or not, I had kind of an emotional challenge, and I ended up going back home. And while I was there, a man saw me and invited me to be a part of his band that traveled. And we ended up traveling all around the country, kind of doing cover tunes. And we ended up doing a show in Las Vegas. And there was a man there whose name was Gregory, and his wife, Helene, had I'm going to call it a performing arts school. They had both been teachers in the studio system in Hollywood. And then when now that started to break down, they moved to Vegas and opened this school. And there was something compelling about it. I mean, there was no rhyme or reason to my choice. It was like, oh, I need to be here. So I left the band. I went into this school. I mean, I worked as a cocktail waitress to pay for it. And I did acting, and I did singing, and I did dancing, and I mean, I did like this whole 1-year program of immersion in performing. And in Vegas, there was, at the MGM Grand, there was a show called Hallelujah Hollywood, and they had a line of 6 Black women who were the dancers in this group. And somebody told me I should apply at this other place to sing. And so I went there, and they said, well, we like you as a singer, but we think you need to go to the MGM. And they hired me as a dancer. And so I was on this huge stage, as a showgirl for a year and a half. And the great thing about that was, I think it prepared me for big stages, because you can't be little on a large stage when you're dancing or singing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell people, everything that happens to you prepares you for where you are. And I'm sure that was one of my preparation points.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you mentioned earlier about that there wasn't any rhyme or reason to your path. And maybe you've heard that saying that, you can't connect the dots forward, but you can connect them back when you look back, and everything makes sense, right? And prepares you for that stage. Wow. Okay. So now you're dancing in Las Vegas. Where do you go from there?
Well, I was dancing, and I was also the understudy for one of the leads. And there was, The Wiz was on Broadway, and they were getting ready to do a company in that traveled in Los Angeles. And so a friend of mine said, oh, come and audition. And so it was crazy. I mean, I got in my car, and I go to Los Angeles, and I auditioned, and I didn't get it, but I met this guy.
Oh,
and it was like, one of those love at first sight things, right? Which didn't end up being that, but it was a catalyst for me to move to Los Angeles and start singing and auditioning. And I got a job working on Princess Cruise Lines. And so it was the catalyst for me going and really starting to see how much I loved performing and how much I wanted to act and bring my skills and my expression to the stage.
yeah. Wow. Well, I'm hearing that 5 on the risk-taking scale is coming in loud and clear here. So, but tell us a little bit about what it's like to be in that mode of, you're trying out for these parts, and then you're waiting, right? And then you don't get it, and then you get one, and then you decide. I mean, were there a lot of offers coming in, and then you say, oh, I'm going to do the cruise line? Or were you like, oh, thank God I got something, and now I'm going to, maybe tell us a little bit about what it was like in between gigs.
It was more like the latter. Anytime I got a job, it was great. I mean, because, when you're going on auditions, you have to still eat. So, I was a hostess at Denny's at night so that I could audition in the daytime. Bandy Camp, Cookies had this big audition for singers and dancers, but really what they were hiring you for was to be dancers and cookies at grocery stores in the parking lot to get people to buy Vandy Can't cookies. So I was a shortbread. And I did all these different crazy things, and then I'd get a job, and that would be great. And then I'd start to run out of money, so I'd go do something else. And the cruise line came because they had decided, Princess had decided that they were going to invite singers on and to create shows. So they would rehearse you on land. Now the shows are like massive and fabulous. At the time they were smaller. And so you did 3 or 4 different shows and you were characters, and then you would do your own nightclub act. And so that was incredible because at that time they paid you in cash, and you would go out for 4 to 6 weeks, and then you'd make enough money, and then you'd know that your next gig was going to be in another 2 months. So and then you could audition in between. But it was exciting because you got to be with a band, you got to travel to all these amazing places, you got to meet a lot of extraordinary people, and you could take care of yourself without, having to wait tables anymore or whatever else we were all doing at that time.
Yeah. Well, and I'm guessing too, the variety of the performances would be really fun too, that you would do the same show for a bit, but then, 2 months later you get to do different show, different songs. And yeah, so that would be really fun. So would you say at that time you were kind of living the dream?
Yeah. And I still wanted to act. But there was a lot of competition. And then I started to I got an agent, and I started to get theater things. And I was very grateful for that because theater, you have to be present in theater. You have to be present with your lines, with the people's lines, with what's going on the stage, with the blocking. And so that ended up actually being great training ground, because at one point I got a soap opera, and that's what they do. It's like theater. Everything moves, and it's like being on a stage. So it was, the doors started opening, and it was amazing. I did television and film, and I did all this stuff, and I was taking care of myself. I bought my first home. I mean, it was really great. I won Star Search. There was a show called Star Search, and I won in the acting category. And so they handed me $100,000 on TV, and I bought my first home.
What? Wow! Congratulations!
Yeah, it was
How
great.
fun. So yeah, really living the dream. So if I could ask, at what point, what age were you where you were kind of finally hitting your mark here?
I was in my 30s.
In your 30s, okay. And then from there, what was next then? You just continued to soar in that realm?
I did. And then the doors started closing. It was the most I would go up for auditions for series, and I'd be one of the last 2 people, and they choose the other person. Or I'd be up for a movie, and I'd be in the last 3 or 4, and they choose someone. They all started, and I started kind of freaking out because, by that time I had married and I had children, but I was also, my marriage was falling apart, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't not have income, right? And but I was also doing a lot of spiritual work and taking workshops and classes. And there was this thing that kept saying, you're the captain of your ship. You get to create your own reality. And I kept thinking, well, if that's true, if these doors are closing, then I get to do something else. And so I went and I interviewed to work for a very large media management company in HR, only to make money till my acting picked up. And so that I started doing that, and then they kept promoting me, and acting wasn't picking up. And all of a sudden I ended up in corporate communications and managing their intranet, and working for a man who had like all these different departments. And I started working with his teams to help them become connected. Little did I know that all of this was going to end up being part of my life later. I still kept thinking as soon as my acting comes back, then I'm going to be, it's going to be great. And so eventually everything just completely shut down. And I stayed there and I went to, for spiritual psychology. I took spiritual classes. I started being a spiritual counselor, and things just started evolving, even into getting into ministerial school, which was something I was like resistant to, but I kept having dreams. And so finally I surrendered, and everything I had done up until that point, to the point where I became a minister, it all supported what I did in ministry. I was on a stage, I was speaking, I was teaching, I was working with women, I was supporting the music ministry. I mean, it was fascinating to me that it had all come together in this thing that I had no clue would happen.
Yeah. Wow. So, but yet you're the captain of the ship. But that's interesting, yeah, because each piece was in a way very different, and yet, but they all come together to prepare you for now this ministry. And would you say that you were very spiritual, and that spirituality was a key thread through your life, even as a young person, or did you find that when you were more of an adult?
Well, yeah, well, when I grew up, we grew up in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and but so that everybody went to church, but I kept saying, well, I kept feeling like, what, there's got to be something more, because it feels like God's kind of mad at us, and we keep messing up. And so I kept saying, well, if God is love, how does this work? I mean, how's all, and they would tell me to sit down and be quiet, but I kept asking those questions anyhow. And then I discovered, new thought and different religions, that there was a golden thread, that we have a divine connection, whatever that looks like, whether you practice religion or not. And so that was interesting to me. And so I felt like if I have a direct connect to the divine, then I also have love that lives within me. And I also get to create spaces of loving and connection and connectivity. And so when I speak or teach or whatever, there are those principles underlying, even though I'm not using spiritual religious language, because I don't want to push anyone away, but it's like, you're powerful, you're dynamic, you have everything you need to create the life you want. And and if you don't believe that, look up here, because I'm a miraculous unfolding. There's no reason I should be up here doing this based on where I came from.
Yeah. Yeah. It was this, yeah. So a series of steps, and then you can kind of role model that, and wow, very cool. Okay, so kind of these themes, all these things just kind of weave together, come together. So now you're in the ministry. Were you feeling like that was, now you've arrived there, that wasn't temporary, like the HR role felt like, well, it's temporary until my acting gig, and then now are you thinking, okay, acting's over, now it's ministry?
Yeah. But this is what I want to tell anybody who's listening here. You make a plan and the universe laughs, because because I thought, okay, this is it. This is great. I found it. It's all good. And it was. I mean, I was doing all the things I love to do. And then at about 8 years, I was feeling tired. And my husband was saying, maybe you should go see a doctor or whatever. And I was like, oh, no, I'm fine, and he's like, no, maybe you should go see. So I go and I have a checkup, and they tell me that I have these numbers that are headed towards Addison's disease, which is really adrenal failure. And when I went back to the senior minister at our community, he said, you got to take a sabbatical. You're going to take yourself out if you don't stop. And that's exactly what the doctor had said to me, but I kind of ignored it.
Oh.
So he told me to take this sabbatical, and I was resistant, so for 3 months, I had to be home. No work, no phones, no, nothing. And what I discovered was I had been meditating for over 25 years. But what I discovered is I didn't know how to be still because I identified myself with work. And I identified myself with being validated for who I was by working and achieving and succeeding. But when you can't do anything, you got to sit there. And so then I got to look at how I was eating my stress, how I wasn't resting, how I, how I wasn't taking care of myself. And that launched, the women in my family, there had been a lot of trauma and a lot of them left ill and depressed and overweight. And I looked in the mirror and, oh my goodness, I was becoming one of them. And I said, okay, so these 3 months, I've got to do something to change me. So I changed my eating. I hired a trainer. I'd go to the gym. I would walk. I was journaling more and I did more spiritual practice. And what happened was, I think it was during that time that the trajectory of my life began to shift, only I didn't know it. Because I get back to work and I'm working part-time at first so I can build back up. And there was nothing wrong, but there was discontent. And I was like, well, what's this? And I was achieving, I was still doing everything, but there was something that was like, something's off. And finally, I was really inner guided that I had to leave. And I was having these visions in my meditations that I needed to get an office, which made no sense because I had an office. and, and, but it was, and I guess what I want to say to anybody, sometimes these inner callings are not logical. They don't make sense. And so the longer I stayed and just kind of tried to push the discontent away, the more restless I became. And the more discontented I became, and my sleeping patterns were off. Because what I know today is that I was being called to leave and do something else. But the part of me that's like, what about security? what about what I've created? Was like, no, we are not leaving. To do what? But it was like, you have to leap. And, when they say take a leap of faith, sometimes you have to leap before that the net's there. And so I talked to my husband and I said, I think I have to leave. And he said, I know. He said, you've been miserable. And I said, but nobody's doing anything to me. He said, yeah, I know. So I gave my notice and they asked me where was I going? And I said, I didn't know. And they asked me, was I going to go to another church? I said, no. They said, are you going to start a church? I said, no. Then they said, well, what are you going to do? I was like, I have no idea. And they said, that sounds kind of crazy. And I said, yes, it does. So I got an office with 3 other people. And I literally just said to people that I knew, I'm open for coaching and counseling people. And without me advertising, people just started showing up. And I had already written a second book, and so I was working on a third, and I already had meditation and singing CDs because I had those before. But what I want to say is like, in that moment, as I'm sitting there and I'm starting this business, I got clear I was clueless. I didn't know what I was doing. And so I said, well, if I don't know this, maybe there's a lot of stuff I don't know. So I went looking for a leadership program that I could just invest in to teach me how to run a business, because I had always worked for someone else and I had always built their businesses. Mm-hmm. So I did. I went and my business partner, Jean Hendry, who you'll talk to at another time, she had been helping me do little things outside, and we started talking about, well, what if we took my background and my knowledge that I was learning in leadership school, and we took her background, because she had been a trainer and done all these amazing things, and we put them together and created something for women. And that's where Women Creating Our Futures was born. And we are now in our 6th year. And when I was leaving the church, you could never have told me I would be doing this today. It wasn't even in my mind,
Mhm.
but I think the universe knew. And I think that the moment I said, when you say no to one thing, you're saying yes to something else.
And it's, yeah, and then there's things, opportunities open up. I want to comment on, you made the statement about that you found out you had clarity that you were clueless. I love that, because many times, people start a business thinking that they have the answers, right? Or they know, well, they usually have an expertise in something, but you're right. There's the whole entrepreneurial leadership business owner side that is really an art and a science and a skill all in itself. So as I found, as I went from being in corporate roles, working for others, and then now working for myself, and it's a very different philosophy. And I too have sought out coaches and people to help me with the things where I'm clueless. So I love that
Yeah.
statement.
I really, it was striking. I think the first day I sat in the class, I cried through most of it because I was like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I don't have a job now.
Well, yeah. And yeah, then you have to go, well, I can do this. Everything else I've done, I've been successful. So, it's interesting to me too that I guess I have this stereotype that if someone's called into the ministry, that they would be there. That's a lifelong calling. And
Mhm.
so to hear you moved into it and then moved out of it is, I guess, a surprise for me.
Well, but you know what? I think ministry doesn't have to be in walls. And
Ah,
so, like, for instance, I mean, I coach people, in corporate and secular and everything, but I also on Facebook every Monday morning I do a community prayer circle where people from all over the world come in and we pray for something, and or they put their prayer requests in there, and um and and what I tell people is, like, it's not about a religion. It's about, if people stand together, we make a difference. So I feel like my ministry moved from the church environment to different. So the great thing about it is, though, because I'm not affiliated there, I was in India in February speaking at an ashram, an international ashram for an international women's conference, and then I've taken people to Chartres to walk the labyrinths, and I've taken people to Italy to be in the temples of humankind, and I've gone to Peru. So I get to do all these different things that are in alignment with my belief system, but I don't necessarily call it ministry.
yeah, it's almost like you're saying, there are no walls. It's the world now. The world is your kind of congregation or, oh,
Mhm.
wow, very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Cynthia, I got to tell you, I could talk with you all afternoon about what other parts of your life and different things. Um, but we probably should start wrapping up. So let me ask you this as kind of a closing question: is, when you look back on your career and on your life, what do you think served you best? Is it a characteristic, a strength, a personality trait, maybe?
Mm.
What served you best?
You know, I think the fact that I'm a seeker has served me best, and my curiosity and my adventurous nature. I feel like life is an adventure. And when you feel stuck, it's because you're attached to something and don't want to let go of it to see what's next, what's around the corner. So for me, it's like that seeker part of me. I'm so grateful for her because she's always said, well, what about this? Well, what do you think about that? Oh, let's go over here. And I think we all have seekers within us, and I think we all have adventurers within us. I think it's that trusting it, trusting that you're here. There's not just one path for you to express on this planet. There could be many.
Wow, so powerful. Um, I love that seeker, because you mentioned early in your career and your journey, you were all about seeking and risk taking and going, right? And then at the end there, when you were in the ministry, I remember you saying, I'm leaving. Where's my security? I built all these things. And then, it is scarier for some reason when you start having, responsibilities of house and kids and, other obligations. So I'm glad you shared that, because I think it is, you are still able to be a seeker, even though you have those other obligations.
Yes, and I think it's what keeps me alive and joyous, that I get to experience new things all the time.
Ah, yeah. So what do you think is next for you? Do you have, I mean, are you feeling like now again you're in that dream job and you're very content and joyous, or are you starting to feel that scratchy feeling yet that you start seeking?
No, Jean and I just created a portal for women called the Possibility Portal, and we are, we had women write about their businesses, and we created a book, and we've been doing an in-person conference for 5 years. Well, clearly with COVID, there's not going to be in-person conferences.
Yeah.
So we're doing our first virtual conference. And what we discovered is there are opportunities to connect with more women and do other things, because people don't have to fly to Denver to be in a hotel. And so that's exciting to me. We get to create it, and women have been coming into the portal and they've been loving it. And so I feel like it's a new adventure. We don't totally know everything because we've never been here before, but it's fun.
It's fun. Well, and it sounds like you get to create, you and Jean together, or you guys are creating whatever you want. So again, you have no borders, you have no boundaries. You really just look at, well, what's calling you at this point, or what, and then probably what are you hearing from from these women, right? And what are their needs? And then, well, how can you fulfill those? So
Exactly.
So you will probably always be content, right? Because you're fulfilling such a purposeful work that that's wonderful. Well, any other words of wisdom that you would share with our listeners?
I guess, first of all, I want to thank you for doing this and inviting people to tell their stories. What I would say to anyone listening is, you're here for a reason. You're not an accident. You've got something that nobody else can do the way you can do it. And even if it feels scary, even if it feels like you don't know what you're doing, trust that calling, that urge within you is important. And just all you have to do is do one step at a time.
Wow. Well, those are some very powerful words of wisdom. But I asked that last question. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing your story. Listeners, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe below, and you'll be alerted then for other interviews as they come up. If you have any questions for me or for Cynthia, you can post those on my website, lifestorycurator.com, which is where I also post all of these interviews. And I guess on that note, and you can also post questions, again, either for Cynthia or for myself. So I guess on that note, then, I would wish everybody stay safe and stay well, and let's keep the storytelling going. Thank you.